is the We Are You Morning Crew, and I am George Daigle. You're in the right place to get the sizzling subjects and the trending topics. Good morning to you, and especially you. A brand new day. Happy Pride to you as we celebrate a month of being you, understanding you, loving you, and the people in your community. Whether you're an ally, whether you're trans, whether you're LGBTQ. Are you hearing yourself, love?
No, I'm not.
But I'll get you. We'll get her right. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, we are here. The one and only Lioness. Good morning.
Good morning, George. How y'all feeling this fine Wednesday morning, I should say. How y'all feeling?
You know what? You sound like me most days. I have to look up what day of the week it is.
Okay.
Where we at?
It's rolling by.
Yes.
But you doing all right?
I am doing great, grand, and glorious. We are going to be okay as we celebrate Pride Month. Thank you so much, DB Marshall, for another great show. He's on vacation. I envy him. That man takes more vacations than the president.
I know that's right. Ain't nothing like a good vacation.
He's in Alaska, and I think he's doing Alaska and Canada this week. What it is, it's nice to be grown, I guess.
Alaska and Canada, that's nice.
Right.
That's a passport trip. Okay.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, today we are celebrating, as I said, Black Pride. Well, Black Pride too, yes. But Pride in general. And there are so many different facets of our community. I know that people outside of the community call us the letter people, and I get it, because I do too sometimes. You know, there's the LGBT, the L, the G, the B, the Q, the I, the A, the plus, and then there's the pansexual, there's the asexual, there's the non-binary, there's the queer, there's the non-gender conform. Baby, there's so many different aspects to the spectrum, or the rainbow, if you will. And today, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to get to know who our community is and how to use the right terms. What makes sense? What does that even mean? And so this is one of the reasons that I have attached myself to this young lady to my left here, because she is amazing. As I've heard it says, she's that girl.
Yeah,
she's that girl. Yeah, she's that girl. You know, in the spectrum of LGBTQ activists, she's that girl.
Yes.
She's that girl. Yes. So today, let's begin the conversation, because one of the first issues that most people get confused is, what is the difference between gender and sexuality? Mm-hmm. And so let's start there, because that's an easy place to start, right?
It is an easy place to start. So good morning, everyone. We wanted to have this conversation today because we felt like it was very important, because one thing everyone always says is they always changing the terms. Mm-hmm. It's always something. And then that LGBTQ is so many letters and this and then the third. And so this is that conversation. Pull up, grab a pad if you need one. We are going to get into some stuff this morning. So now, specifically as we talk about gender and sexuality, it seems like those are two broad terms that we all kind of know, but I'm going to just take a moment to just kind of break down what's the difference, because I think a lot of times what we're seeing is people getting it confused. Your gender is when you show up in your gender is actually, so when you're born, you're assigned at birth. You know, these babies come into this world and they don't have a full identity of themselves. Mm-hmm. They don't know anything. They don't even know how to read. They don't know English. They don't know whatever language you're going to give them to speak. They don't have any framework. But from the moment a child is born, we look at their genitalia, mm-hmm. and then we put something called gender on them. Mm-hmm. Gender is a societal construct.
Correct.
Gender is the roles that we have decided in our society exist, and we have broken those roles down in a binary in our society. So in our society, we have generally accepted that people, regardless of what your genitals look like, there are two genders. Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, we know that there are all different types of personalities and all kinds of races and colors, but we've only, in our current Western medicine, we identify two genders.
Okay.
And it's male and female. Mm-hmm. And with those actual genitalia, we'll then assign girl and boy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Your genitals are male. So, for example, you can have a child born male, assigned male at birth. And then what our parents will say is, oh, I have a boy. I see this penis and I have a boy. And then from penis to boy, we've now transitioned in our mind to he's going to like blue. He's going to like trucks. He's going to do these things. He's going to play sports. And that is a gender role.
Let's talk about that for a quick second. I want to stay right there because I understand and being from the community and learning.
Right.
I understand that gender is the construct. Here, I'm society talking for a second.
Correct.
Society says, okay, the penis is a male and the vagina is a female. Okay, I can work with that. I can work through. I can work through that. Where I lose it from society is the gender role.
There we go.
Because I think the roles are what are destructive to a lot of young people.
Yes.
We inhibit the opportunities of who they could be or what they could be by saying, well, boys do this and girls do that. And I know for a little black gay boy like myself, it was very hard for me. You see my mascots up there, the two Barbie dolls. I love me some Barbie dolls.
You do.
But I could not play with them because the construct says because you have a penis,
you cannot play with those dolls.
You know?
And that is the crux of the argument. And that is why it gets confused again with sexuality. Now, here's the reality. We live in a world and now we've given these children these roles. And boys are supposed to like girls. And boys are supposed to like blue, and boys are supposed to like trucks, and boys are supposed to like masculine things. And we put all of these things just based on that genitalia. We didn't ask the kid.
No.
We don't ask.
No.
We immediately start giving them blue in the crib. We immediately start giving them only boy toys in the crib. We've decided already. And the idea that we all believe that that's always going to be 100% right all the time is crazy to me. Because what we also know is that gender is different than your sexuality. So now let's say you have this child, right? And let's say their gender aligns, so they grow up and they have that penis and they do feel like a boy, right? But then that child then has a sexuality as they begin to start growing and learning the differences between boys and girls, and they realize that their sexuality is different.
Right.
So then you may have a child that is a boy that likes boys, and in our society we would call that
gay.
So you would have a little gay baby. You know, my son likes boys, and now I see that my son is gay. But what that doesn't mean is just because he's gay is that he's a girl. Are we clear on that? Look, we're aware.
We are aware. Yes.
Society is comfortable saying that boys can like boys. We know that exists.
Society is speaking again. Only because, you know, we're talking about this entire conversation.
Correct.
Society says again that, okay, if you're gay, you must want to be a girl. Remember that question? I remember the question growing up. If you were in a relationship, a same-sex relationship, the question was, who's the boy and who's the girl? And that's living in that heteronormative narrative.
And the gender role. Because again, we can't even look at relationships even between two men without trying to create a role. Because that's how binary our minds are. So now we have that boy. So we know that gay people exist in our society, and that's the G in LGBT.
Yes.
Where we get it confused though, like what you just said, is there's an assumption that because your sexuality says you like something, that your gender is affected by that. Let me give you an example on the other side of that. So let's say now that child that had the penis that we talked about a moment ago, let's say that child's gender, they began to start, as they began to age around 3, 4, 5, they start telling their mom, I don't feel like a boy. That child would then be considered trans. Now, somewhere on the spectrum, we don't know what that looks like, but we in society today understand that there are some people whose gender doesn't always match the way they want to live, which is how you show up in the world. Certainly. May not necessarily match what your biological sex was.
Okay.
But this is the T. That trans person, if they like, so for example, that same trans person, if they like men, what would you consider them? If it's a boy that transitioned to female, a sign male at birth that transitioned to woman in their life, became a woman, and then they started dating a man, what would you call that person?
Their sexuality?
Yes.
They would be straight.
Exactly. That's where society gets it twisted though, because in a lot of people's minds, because that child was born a boy, that transition in their mind gets canceled because they don't believe that people can transition.
Correct.
And then they conflate the two and say that that boy is now gay for liking other boys.
Right.
They don't acknowledge that that boy has gone through a transition and that her gender now is female.
Yes, yes.
Now, let's flip it. Now, let's say that same boy that was born a signed child at birth, right? Signed as boy. Let's say they transition to girl and then they like girls. Ooh, now see, this is the thing that messes people up.
Well, they would be gay.
Would they be?
Because they like the same sex.
No, well, technically.
Well, two girls that like a girl that likes another girl.
They would be lesbian.
Lesbian.
She'd be
gay kind of goes.
I get what you're saying. But she would be lesbian. But this is the society would not call. Would you society the same logic that society uses to say that a trans woman dating a man is gay? They don't want to give that same grace to say if that trans woman dated a woman, would she be a lesbian? They wouldn't call her a lesbian. What would they say? I guess would they say she's straight?
Society would probably say that.
That this a straight man, but he's dressing in girl clothes all the time?
Right. Well, society, again, and as incorrect as they can, because the construct is the construct and the limitations of, because you've got that binary ideology, then you want to take that box and put it over here.
Exactly. And that's what the conversation with. Later, we're going to talk about these boxes and how they limit and how they bind people. But I think the key thing that I want to get in this first part of the topic when we talk about gender versus sexuality is your gender is a role that you're given by your society. Your actual sexuality is what you like. It's who you're attracted to. And those things don't always have to line up so evenly. You can be a trans woman that likes women. That happens. So then everybody that's trans ain't gay. And in the way that the society would say. There are trans women that identify as lesbian and like women. And there's this myth that we transition because of a homosexual identity in the sense that we're gay men trying to date men. But there are trans women that date women. And I feel like this conversation is important to have that.
That's really important. I want to go over that one more again.
Yeah.
Just because these are the ABCs, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
And so now that we're looking at the spectrum of the ABCs of the LGBTQ, you better get it. Let's talk about this once again, because there is a couple, and I'm not going to mention their names, but they are very active on Instagram.
Right.
And it's a transgender man who's now pregnant.
Right. Okay.
Who is dating a cisgender man. So for a lot of people, boggles the mind, blows the mind.
Because they see two men.
They see two men. But it's a transgender man.
Correct.
Who is pregnant.
Yes, they're both men.
They're like totally confused. But again, that would be a gay couple.
That is a gay couple.
That is a gay couple.
Yes. And so what society will often do, and this is what really is unfortunate, society will put their own respectability politics, their own moral beliefs, their own opinions. So I always say all the time, people assume that LGBT folks, particularly trans folks, are trying to change their minds. I'm not trying to change your mind about how you feel about anything.
Right.
I'm asking that you respect my identity, how I show up in the world, and the people that I date. So in your example, that trans man and his spouse, his partner, two men have decided to have children together, but because he has organs inside of him that allow him to carry a child. The trans man is carrying the child in the relationship. And that does not take away that he's a man, because he shows up in the world 24/7, 365 as the man that he is. And society wants to limit that because, again, that's your own personal comfort, but that's not what we're talking about. Right. We're talking about real scientific identities that show up in nature that have existed around the world since the beginning of time, since the beginning of recorded human existence. There have been variations in gender and in sexuality. And I think a lot of times we've allowed Western beliefs, we've allowed the opinions of churches, we've allowed doctrine to come in and give us this ideology, particularly for those of us that are of color, that is not necessarily in alignment with who we are. If we can agree that Jesus wasn't white, then we can agree that there's some things in the Bible that aren't in alignment with the real world that we live in.
Come on now.
Right?
Oh, you done disturbed some folks.
Oh, I've shaken the children this morning.
Yes, you have.
So when we're talking about gender versus sexuality, if we can establish that there are things in the Bible that require require context, then when we're talking about gender, we have to understand that there are some people that are going to be born in the world where their genitals are going to align up with how they feel. And there are some people that are going to be born in the world where their genders aren't. There are going to be some people that come into the world and they're going to be boys that are going to love women. They're going to grow up to love women and marry wives. And there are going to be some people that are still boys and that are no less men when they grow up to be men that are going to like men. And that's the crux of this conversation, gender versus sexuality.
Wow. A great beginning to this dynamic conversation, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about the LGBTQ spectrum. Oh, you're going to get some lessons today. Get your notepad, call your friend. Hey, get the allies that are still trying to understand and get them to listen in because we've got more on this great conversation. It is George. It is the Lioness. It is the We Are You Morning Crew. Hope you're having a great day so far. Oh, it's edumacation today. Good morning.
Once upon a time, there was a princess named Sophia. Sophia became a beautiful queen. Yes, she did, child. The people were enchanted by her voice. Sophia wanted to share her voice with others, so she traveled to another kingdom called Atlanta. Sophia's voice is now heard 5 days a week on WERUradio, child. Monday through Friday, 2 until 6 p.m. Eastern. And they all lived happily ever after.
Yes, indeed, it is the We Are You Morning Crew, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and those who have yet to make up your minds, and you really don't have to. It is the We Are You Morning Crew. I am George Daigle. She is the Lioness, and we are here together, our powers combined, to become the We Are You Morning Crew. And today, it is a phenomenal conversation, a needed conversation. We're talking about the LGBTQ spectrum. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a condensed version of a very long class to understand the nuances of who we are in the community, understanding all of the terminology that we now commonly use to describe who we are. And again, it is an honor, a privilege to do this show with the Lioness. She has brought such a vibe for me to the show that was missing and that I always wanted in the vision. But anyway, moving to this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, we're starting with the ABCs of the LGBTQ. You like how I did it?
I love that. You better come up with something to say.
And so now we are moving into the next phase of the conversation. Now, if you missed it earlier, you can go back. It's going to be on YouTube. We talked about gender and sexuality, what those are, what those mean, what the differences are. And now we're moving on to our next phase. And I'll hand it over to the Lioness.
And so in this next phase, we're now going to talk a little bit about, we talked about this binary. We talked about, what a man, men and women and the roles, but I wanted to double back now and let's just actually break down. So my question for you, George, I have a leading question that's going to spawn conversation, and my question for you is, what is a man or woman to you? What makes a man or a woman to you?
That is a difficult question and one that's been presented many, many times. My definition, just looking at it, I would say that a woman is the matriarchal figure of the family or the household. They have a matriarchal presence. I would say a man has the patriarchal presence in the house or in society. Now, I don't mean to say, because I want to make sure that I'm saying this correctly, I don't mean their gender. I mean how they present. So that, to me, is the definition of a woman and a man.
Okay. I'll say this, so then I think that's a good launching part. I feel like the idea that you're aware that man and woman are roles. I hear that in your definition. So you said a matriarchal figure and you said a patriarchal figure. And our society very much so. So your sexuality, which is your sex, which is what you're assigned at birth, which is male or female. And let me also clarify with sex really fast. You can also not be easily defined at birth. There are intersex people.
Certainly.
There are people whose genitalia is not necessarily as clearly defined as others, right? So there are some people whose penis don't necessarily look just like a penis. They may have a penis, but they have a vaginal opening, or they may have a vaginal opening and they may have internal testicles. I mean, there are different levels of intersex. sex. So I need to make that clear too. But from the two commonly held sexes, we've come up with these gender roles of woman and man. And the way we get to woman and man is kind of like what you said. They're roles. So then there's this idea of what a woman is. And a woman in a lot of people's mind is she's soft, she's pink, she likes certain things, she carries herself a certain way. Now, we know that there are women that aren't those things.
Certainly.
And we've accepted that there are women that are masculine of center. We know that there's a thing called studs.
Mm-hmm.
We know that there are women that are that have a wide variety of expressions. And we know that there are men that have a wide variety of expressions. But this is the real reality. In our society, we literally say woman and man, and we immediately go to what's between people's legs.
Yes.
Even though we know, and we clearly have examples that, there are masculine women that exist.
Certainly. Yes.
But we masculine and feminine men that exist. But we immediately go to these are what a man and a woman should be. And so I want to break down that in our society, the government, but also our medical professionals have also identified that there's a difference between between different types of identities. And we call that cis and trans. And basically what that is sociologists realized when they were having people come in and they started identifying that it's not just one person, but it's a whole group of people that their gender and the way they show up in the world is not aligning with their sex. And so anytime scientists are trying to classify things, they will give it a definition, right?
Certainly. Yes.
So a word that has currently been put out there is cis, C-I-S. And cis essentially it means that your gender and your actual sexual organs are in alignment, meaning the way you showed up in the world with your genitals does not conflict with what society deems is an appropriate gender expression with the way you show up in the world. So, for example, you, George, are a cis man. Though you identified that you're gay.
Because that's my sexuality.
That's your sexuality.
Yes.
You are a cis man.
Right.
That's not me taking any privilege away from you as a man. That's actually identifying that there's a difference between you and a trans man.
Gotcha.
That's not a slur. I feel like because that term has been used, because cis heteronormal or normative folk usually aren't used to having a label put on them. Sure. Most folks aren't used to having a label, but this cis label is just simply a way of scientists saying that there are some people who, for lack of a better phrase, are what we would consider normal.
Well, let's pause there for a second, because a lot of people, we've started to hear that word more often.
Yes.
And people who don't know or weren't aware, they think that's a new term. But please explain to people that this is not new. It's just now become a part of the conversation and the language that we commonly use.
So this term has existed. It started really being used in the 70s. And it actually is a term that over time has been manifested in academia and in scientific circles. And particularly for medical professionals, they needed to find a way to say, hey, this person is cis, this person is one way, and this person is another way. So this person, their gender and their sexuality is aligned. I do not have to prescribe medications for them. They do not need counseling. This person's gender identity is what we would consider typical, neurotypical.
Okay.
And then there's another identity where your gender does not necessarily align with that sex you got at birth, and we now call that
trans.
And those trans people are now showing up in the world, and they're coming into our offices and they're showing up, and we have to find a way to differentiate between the two. And so we have to say that these people are cis, meaning they're analogous, they're in alignment with their gender, and everything is in alignment. And then we have this group of people over here who, it doesn't mean that they're not normal in their mind, but it does mean that there is a variation. They are not neurotypical in the way that their gender expression shows up. And we've identified those people as trans. And I think I needed to really take that time to break down these two definitions, because right now that seems to be a part of the culture war. It's folks feeling like y'all are putting a label on us when it was never community. I didn't wake up calling myself trans.
Right.
I woke up feeling like a woman, and society told me that means you're trans.
Yes.
And then I started saying that I was trans because somebody told me that I was trans. But it was a doctor that gave me that label. And just like the doctor gave me that label, for people that aren't trans, they call them cis. And that's not a slur either. It just means you are not trans.
Well, here's a quick question, and I may be jumping ahead of the class.
Okay.
So give me my A if I am ahead of class. But here's the question I have. When you are transgender and you have, and I want to make sure, sexual assignment surgery. Is that correct? Is that the right term?
Gender confirmation surgery is what we call it now.
Okay, gender confirmation surgery. Are you still called a transgender man or woman, or you now is the proper term just to call you a man or a woman? That's a real question for me, and not a slight.
So the thing that I want to be very, very clear in this conversation that we're having is that I, the Lioness, do not speak for all trans people.
Certainly. Thank you.
Just like I as a black person cannot speak for all black people. There is my lane and I'm sticking in it. But what I will tell you is I can tell you commonly held beliefs and definitions and how they apply broadly in communities. So what I'm saying is that you can't go up to an individual from this conversation and take what I said and say, you are this.
Very good.
Don't do that. That is not okay. This is where you would go through, because you're getting this information now, for those of you under the sound of my voice, take this information and then use it to start a conversation, which means ask questions. Because what I think works for me doesn't work for everybody, because the whole point I want you to get out of this conversation is that these terms don't apply to everyone. That is the big trick on the spectrum. That's why we're having this spectrum conversation. The big thing that I want people to unpack is that boxes everyone doesn't fit neatly in the boxes. And when you have boxes, they often limit people, and it tells people who they are and who they can't be. And that is something that we as trans folk, as gay people, as LGBT folks, we don't fit in boxes, and we never will.
So what you're saying is basically that when you are having the conversation, you have to synthesize the information. You can't necessarily say, well, this is the term that I learned, so you're that. Because
Correct.
every contact,
every person is going to identify differently. We are unique as snowflakes. So, for example, I identify, and I can say this in this conversation, I identify as a trans woman. But I identify as a woman first. I'm a woman of trans experience, as I would say to some people.
Love it.
Yes, I'm a woman of trans experience, and I'm a black woman. But if you were to ask me, I can't separate my transness from my blackness any more than I can separate my transness from the fact that I'm married to a man and my sexuality is straight to me. Because in my mind, regardless of what you think I am, I see myself as a woman and I show up in the world as a woman. And so then when I'm with my man, I see him as my male partner, and we are in a heterosexual relationship in my mind.
Works for me. I mean, it makes it, and it's not really, to be honest, I think that society, here I'm society. Society says, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense to me. But if you really think about it, if you're really honest, if this person says that he or she is a woman, identifies as, and they're dating someone who is of the opposite sex that they identify as, then that is a straight. It's not that hard. And I think society makes it so much harder because this is the box over here, and I need you to fit in this box.
I need you to get in it.
I need you to get in the box, and you don't fit in the box, so something is wrong with you. Can't be wrong with me because I have a box that you're not going in.
And the big thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is being uncomfortable. If I could just tell you how many people, if you really, really get down to it, the reason why they have an issue is because they're uncomfortable. Because what I do, what's between my legs doesn't matter. When you see people in the world, I'm trusting that the way you show up is who you are, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I don't really know what's between your legs. I assumed all this time that George Daigle was a cisgender man, but I did not know that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, I'm assuming that when you go into the bank and you go to and you're talking to the lady and you look at her and in 5 seconds you assess that that's a woman and you go to speak, you're doing that based on an assumption. And that assumption might be right, but it could be dead wrong. And our society doesn't like feeling like they can't identify you off the rip. But you never really could. You never really knew what was between anybody's legs. You don't know what's between your neighbor's legs.
Still don't.
You still to this day have never, unless you have had sex with your neighbors, all of them, you don't know who all of them really are. That's the uncomfortability that people don't want to focus on, is that now people are being open about the fact that you may not know me. Like, you thought you knew your neighbor Bob, and then Bob one day came to you and said, I no longer, this whole time I have not been feeling like what I thought I was, and now I'm Linda, and now you're messed up that you thought you knew who Bob was, and you're uncomfortable now that this new being has shown up and is messing with you. What Linda do don't affect your life. What you're really mad is you thought you knew Bob, and now Bob is Linda. But that's not your business what Linda's doing in her life, and that's the conversation we're having today, ladies and gentlemen. In this conversation on what defines people, people define themselves. That's the real message. Cis versus trans. Now, society says that cis is when you, what we would consider normal, neurotypical behavior and expression that is in alignment with your sex assigned at birth. And then trans is just quite simply when you live in your truth and your truth does not align in what society thinks your sex at birth should be.
Wow. Good stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in, it is the ABCs of the LGBTQ. I am George Daigle. She is the Lioness. Continue, because our conversation continues next hour. We're breaking it all down. Now, remember, this is condensed. Oh, there's more nuances to the conversation. And if you want the education, all you gotta do is Google it. We got more. It is the We Are You Morning Crew. I'm George Daigle. Good morning.
The We Are You Morning Crew.
Download the WERUradio app.
Turn it up loud.
Use the shout out feature to talk directly to your favorite station. It's available on your app store. Search WERU Radio, one word, today.
It is the We Are You Morning Crew. I am George Daigle. Yes, you're in the right place to get the sizzling subjects, trending topics, and great conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in, if you are just listening today, we are talking about the ABCs of the LGBTQ, the LGBTQ spectrum. There are so many nuances, so many titles, and so much verbiage that we use and are still learning as members of the LGBT community.
Yes.
And so this is an opportunity to kind of just break it down and get you to know. Now, if you're just tuning in, you've already missed the conversation about gender and sexuality. But if you're on YouTube, just rewind it, go back and listen. We've talked about the difference between cisgender and transgender and the fact that those terms are not really new and what they actually mean. But again, to get the lessons, go back and listen and do it 2 or 3 times and share it with people who have asked you questions, because I think this is going to be a great, learning tool to kind of provide the undergirding. Is that a good word?
Undergirding is a good word.
Hey, I've been in church a couple of times, an undergirding so that people can understand what these words actually mean. Oh, okay. And then you can have another conversation after they've had the opportunity to get the overview information. But now let's get into the next part of our conversation.
So we ended our last bit of the conversation talking about everyone's differences and how they personally identify.
Yes.
We've identified now that gender and sexuality are 2 different things, as George has said. And we've also identified that even under the types of people, that there's a cis and a trans woman and there's cis and trans men. Mm-hmm. And that trans, now I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about trans. And because there are people that will say, I'm confused. Because you say you trans, but then Demi Lovato say she trans, and now you have, what's her name? The beautiful girl that does the high or low.
Janelle Monáe?
Janelle Monáe. Okay. She now has identified herself as someone that has a trans identity, and people are going, so wait, now I'm confused. Are you trying to be, so is Janelle Monáe trying to be a man? Is Demi Lovato trying to be a man? And the answer to both of those is no.
Okay.
But then I thought trans meant you were born one thing and you wanted to be something else.
Okay. Yeah, I'm there with you right now. Yes.
Right. Well, what I'm declaring all of that up, trans is a spectrum term. There is no complete community that trans defines just by itself. Meaning, under trans, you have genderqueer, you have non-binary, you have non-conforming, you have drag queens, you have people that consider themselves CDs, cross-dressers, you have people that consider themselves all manner of different expressions, and all of these things have been put under one term. And that's why that term is frustrating y'all, because it frustrates us too. So what they did was they created an overall term for every expression that falls outside of the binary. So if you're not a man and you're not a woman, if you're not a cis man or a cis woman, you are trans. That's everybody else.
Wow. So, okay. All right. So back up a little bit, because education time for me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm in class as well. All right. So if you are a drag queen, you fall under the umbrella?
So
because again, in class, teacher, question. Because I have learned in my experience that a drag queen is not the same.
It is not the same for everyone.
Okay.
Again,
okay.
The reason why we sometimes put drag under the umbrella is because there are people that do drag. That drag is their way of being able to express their identity. And some people, their drag starts their transition. Everybody do drag for different reasons. Correct. Some people get in drag and they do drag for performance purposes, but their performances is just for performances. But as we've seen on RuPaul's Drag Race, there are some of those girls that drag allowed them to the first courage to be able to step out and try something different. Yes. And from that experience, they realize this is me. Yes. It's not just clothes. It's not just for the show. Right. So we do acknowledge that drag, while for everyone doesn't fit under the umbrella, for some people, it is their step. So we can't completely take drag out of it, because let's be honest, drag is a way for people to be somebody that they're not. That drag or be somebody that they can't be in regular life, if that makes sense. That makes sense. So you can either be somebody that you're not by putting on drag if you're a cis person, but you can actually use it as a way to express yourself if you are trans or on the spectrum. Again, all of these words are spectrum words, but trans in particular is kind of weird because it's so many identities.
Again, society speaking, as we are learning these terms and are becoming more comfortable with using them in our vernacular, as we, identify sex, gender, so forth and so on, it can be confusing. Now, you explained earlier, and if I was paying attention, tell me if I'm right, you were explaining earlier that trans is just a scientific term, basically.
Correct.
When you are not the neurotypical.
Correct.
Person
expression of behavior, neurotypical gender expression.
Okay, so the transgender men, women, drag queens. What about a non-binary person? Would they also fall under that as well?
Yes, because so let me give you this. So what's really weird about trans is that it's an umbrella term. So for example, under that umbrella term, I would be considered a transsexual.
Okay.
Meaning, and we'll get more into this in our later conversation. Y'all tune in for next week's conversation on gender identities, but I'll go into it a little here. But I am considered a transsexual, meaning that I am someone that was born with genitalia that assigned me at male at birth, and I transitioned to woman, and I've been living 365 at my earliest opportunity ever since as a woman, and I've been doing it, and I've been living my life that way. That makes me trans, but it also allows me to be able to say that I want to be called a woman. But there are some people that are under this expression that don't want to make the binary choice. Again, they don't want to get in a box. So they said, I'm not who you said I was at birth, but I'm not necessarily no woman either. Gotcha. I'm not necessarily a man either. I'm not necessarily either any of those things.
Okay. So right here, with respect to, and again, I am a staunch ally and becoming confirmed in the nuances and the conversations and the affiliation and the verbiage and so forth and so on. But with respect, there are transgender women especially who identify as women, but they are very firm in the fact that they are attached to the genitalia with which they were born.
Correct.
And will never, ever, because of their comfort, whatever the reasons, and that's not my business, but they still identify as trans women. And for society, that is a bit jarring and confusing. And so help me, and I know you don't speak for everyone,
Right.
again, but help me and help us understand what that could mean or should mean or does mean.
So what it actually, so let me say this. So when we were first doing the activism, we wanted people to know about transness, but we also wanted people to know about the importance of us getting the medical services that we needed. So when we first started telling people about what trans were, we talked about the people that needed surgeries. We talked about the people that needed care. We advocated for them because that is the population of people that really at the very beginning of activism, those are the population of people that were facing some of the most systemic oppression as far as accessing medical care.
Okay.
So then it was very easy because a lot of this work also was born out of HIV/AIDS for us to really tackle the issue of making sure that people are treated right by their doctors.
Right.
That was the easiest thing to rally around in the beginning. Unfortunately, though, because we rallied so strongly for the right for every trans person to have surgeries, it got conflated in the media and in the messaging that all trans people should want surgeries.
Yes, it did. And again, learning what I'm learning, I too always thought, well, you want to be a woman, so why are you not changing all of that? I'm listening. Explain.
And so what it really means is that this identity is not determined on a surgery, because if we think about it, trans people have existed since the beginning of time.
Yes.
All around the world.
Yes.
Before there was a surgery.
Okay.
And trans people exist in places to this day where there are no surgeries. There are trans people in Uganda. There are trans people in other places where it's illegal to be trans, but still like air, they rise. And there are trans people in Jamaica and all of these other places that can be anti-trans, but trans people are there. So even where there is no surgery, the identity exists. And it existed before the surgery existed. There are only a handful of doctors, maybe I'd argue say less than 50 doctors on the planet that do the surgery.
Wow.
So then there's not enough doctors to accommodate the amount of people that want the surgery.
Wow.
So if we said that every trans person had to have the surgery to be trans, one, you're creating a class issue, because only Bruce Jenner and people that have $50,000 to drop in cash in a wop, because surgeries are often not included by insurance. Unless you have the money to drop in one wop on a surgery, only the elite can afford those surgeries. So isn't it convenient that the definition of trans, in a lot of people's mind, is a transness that only white rich people can afford?
Wow.
And the fact that a lot of black people believe you still have to have a surgery to be trans, they don't even realize you've bought into the narrative that says that this is something that only rich white people do. When you know you've had black people in your family since the beginning of time that have been LGBT, but that have been trans in particular.
Yes.
And they didn't have access to surgeries, but yet your auntie, like Kendrick Lamar said in his song, we've all had aunties and different family members that have transitioned. He says my auntie is a man now.
Yes.
We've all had people that have transitioned, but they may not necessarily have thousands and thousands or hundreds of $1,000s for surgery, but that doesn't make them less trans. So we got to change the narrative that trans equals surgery.
Come on. Teach the people. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in again, listening to WERUradio, this is the conversation. We got to post this because this is an amazing conversation. And I haven't heard it condensed and given in the way that we're giving it on the show. So today, during Pride Month, as we celebrate and all of who we are, it's great that we are learning to talk about and understand the nuances of who we are. Because even as a member of the alphabet community, I will say it out loud, as a member of the alphabet community, it's still a little daunting. But as we're having this conversation, this is amazing. So thank you for this. Now let's talk about, again, we were talking, I don't know if we talked about it on the air, but we were talking about it during the break. So if I'm repeating myself, it's just for reference. There is still the conflict where people talk about transgender people in particular, transgender men, women in particular, taking the drag queen, non-binary, genderqueer, all of that out. And they're saying, well, if you're a woman, then this is what has to be.
Right.
This is the list.
You have to be able to have kids. You have to be able to, if you don't have a uterus, if you don't have this, this, and that, then this is what I consider a woman. Right. I think you brought something up very interesting about that before when we were in our private moment, when you said there are people that would see, for example, and you used an example of a couple. Can you?
Oh, yeah, there is a couple, and I don't remember their name, but they're very, very prominent in the transgender community, and so please forgive me. I think they're in Philadelphia or somewhere. But anyway, there is a transgender man and a transgender woman who are a couple, and they decided to have a baby. So now you see the transgender man who is having a baby by the transgender woman. And for people, they like, whoa, wait, I'm confused. What the hell is this? What's going on? This, again, here's the box, and this don't fit in none of my boxes I have.
Exactly.
And so people are like, wait, but you're a man, but you're having a baby. I'm confused.
Exactly. I think what people don't realize in the dynamic of transness is that we're never going to fit in your boxes. So that trans woman and her husband, I don't want to say their names, but I think I know who they are. And that trans woman and her husband made the decision to have children. She has a penis. He has a vagina. And they did the magic. And then now he is pregnant with their child. But when you look at them in public, she is a woman, very much so.
Yes.
And he is very much the man in that relationship. And he will be the biological maternal parent of the child. And she will be the biological paternal parent of the child. But she is the woman and he is the man. And the father and mother's roles will align accordingly. She plans on calling her child her child calling her mom, and the same, he plans on that same child calling him dad. I think we live in a society where, because it doesn't make sense to us, our immediate reaction is to reject.
Yes.
And I know that is a safety mechanism, because we're fed so much poison on a daily basis that tells us that we are this and we are that. And a lot of Black people see this transness, this LGBT as the newest attack. This is the newest attack against our Blackness. But if you're being honest, since the beginning of time, you've always in our families, we've always had variances in expression. We've always had the feminine uncle. We've always had the masculine auntie. We've always had the family members that came and they were roommates forever, and no one questioned why they slept in the same bed, but they were roommates. We all had that. What we have a problem with now is people expressing themselves.
Let's stop there, because I want to tell a funny story. I was dating. I was in an 8-year relationship at the time, and their family came over.
Right.
And they stayed at the house, and they were all there. And his niece at the time, apparently she asked the question in the other room to the other family members. So they said, well, go ask them. So she walks in the room in her 6-year-old innocence, and she says, Uncle George, why you and Uncle Day y'all sleep with the same bed together? And I'm looking like, is this the conversation that I'm facilitating?
Ooh,
but it was just so funny because, but she was able to understand it, which leads me to the next question, because a lot of people want to conflate the fact that that talking about, or the presence of transgender people, gay people, LGBTQ people is bad for kids. But kids have such a unique ability to understand, because they are not boxed quite yet.
No.
So they can understand that Billy has 2 moms, or Billy's mom is now her dad, or Billy's mom is now his dad. The kids are and it doesn't. I know I watched Leave It to Beaver all my life.
Yes.
And I watched Good Times and all of the straight role, gender, conforming shows.
Yes.
Ain't never turned me straight in my life.
Never.
So the conservatives now.
I said never.
Never will.
Never.
But the conservatives are using that fear-mongering and saying that our existence, the existence of people who are trans or the LGBTQ community, are somehow what's the word?
framing an agenda that is trying to take away from something,
or bringing them in. And I forget the word. There's
indoctrinating.
Indoctrinating. That was the word I was using. Thank you. They're indoctrinating the young people.
Yes.
So we have to protect them. There's even a bill that a representative in Texas just drew up so that children don't have to go to drag queen shows. They will be banned from attending drag queen shows.
I just think that is ridiculous.
And so let's talk to that. I know that's not in the conversation.
No, it is. It is the conversation. So let me tell you, the literal reason why we're having this conversation today is because we exist in a day and time where an extreme rhetoric has come into this conversation. We've gotten to that place where politicians and other people are playing in people's discomfort and their lack of understanding and their ignorance. And ignorance is not always a negative word. I hate that we use it as a negative word in society, but people are legitimately ignorant because they've never been around these experiences.
Certainly.
And because it's frightening to them, your first instinct is anytime a parent sees anything in the world that they find frightening, the first thing you want to do is protect your child. Get behind me.
Yes.
Get behind me.
Yes.
And unfortunately, in this reaction, this is a reaction that is purely based on disinformation.
Very good.
There is disinformation going out there that trans people, one, have just shown up out of nowhere. There's disinformation that we are now have this agenda and the plan is to take over. There's this myth that LGBT folk in general are anti-Black. That LGBT folk in general are trying to support some greater white agenda. And what it really is rooted in is tribalism. We have gotten to this place where, as a people, we've gotten fed all these different information, and particularly during the Trump administration, disinformation occurred. So negative things are being put out there, and as a result, I think parents and administrators and local elected officials are making rash decisions because they're trying to play in fear because they know what is the great unifier is the other, the big bad other. In times of war, countries rally around each other. Well, we're in a cultural war. We don't have the Taliban to blame. We don't have this other enemy. That Russia thing is going on Ukraine. So the new thing that they're using to rally us together is fear, and the fear particularly around different expressions and identities, and a fear of me having to learn something new and have to say yes to you. Call you a she, or call this person they, or whatever. And there's a real reality that people just don't want to be confronted with anything new.
Well, let's take a break because we were going to talk about pronouns.
Yes.
We kind of got away from that.
Yes.
But that's okay because the conversation is good. So when we come back, we're going to talk about pronouns. Why are they important? What do they really mean? All of that good stuff. So ladies and gentlemen, keep it where you got it. We've got more sizzling subjects, trending topics, and great conversations. It is the ABCs of the LGBTQ Spectrum, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, this is a masterclass. Y'all better pay attention. There will be a test later. Good morning. Yes, indeed, it is the We Are You Morning Crew. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and those who have yet to make up your mind, and you really don't have to. We are here, ladies and gentlemen, and it is myself and the Lioness here in the studio live to talk about, and at least begin the conversation, the overview information as we get into Pride Month, understanding who we are, what the terms mean, what are all of these things that people are saying. I need to understand. Please share this video with your allies, with your friends, people in the community who still have these conversations about who we are. There's still so much to talk about before we wrap this show up. And one of the things before we went to break, we were talking about culture wars. And that is a new term that conservatives and people who are uncomfortable with the real conversation are using. Now, we were having the conversation off the air, but for me, culture wars is so inappropriate because it's not about culture. Because culture is the thing that a group of people find in common that puts them together, and it becomes a commonality of that group. That's what culture is. But a culture war about who we are is not the thing. It's about human rights. And I think that people come up with the terms to soften the hard conversation. So let's not call this human rights. Let's not call this a debate about who people are. Let's call it culture wars because that softens the conversation. But you had another idea on what that meant.
Yes. And so I think culture war implies that there's an enemy combatant. Culture war allows a mainstream dominant white male culture to be able to say we're under attack. It's their way of identifying. So if you think about it, when the British first came to the U.S., they saw the Native Americans as combatants. Not even though those people, that's their land, that's what they had. The colonization mindset told them that in order for us to get the resources that we need, we have to overcome this enemy. And that created a war. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't necessarily a war in which both combatants felt that there was a war. This culture felt at war with these people that were different and unique from them that they did not understand. And instead of there being synergy, there was, we're going to conquer and take over. I think it still is a bit of that conqueror mentality that is carried forward in our society because of the residue of how we started. So then when we, even when we had a civil war, they were battling over human rights. We called it a war between the states, and it was literally a war between North and South, but what they were really battling was human rights, because again, this country from its inception has always seen identities and cultures that did not align with what they thought, with what they thought was their privilege, as the enemy. So then even these slaves that they brought over, when they became free, they saw them as enemy combatants, and they treated them as such. And I feel like that is just a gut check, a gut reaction that this country has to anything that is different. We say that we're a melting pot, but I feel like when they use that word culture war, they're once again gearing up white mainstream America to feel attacked by something and another group over there minding their business that they don't simply understand or want to understand. Anything that comes against their threat of their cultural power is a threat, and that's why they use that word culture war. And so earlier when I was referencing culture war regarding trans folk, they feel that we as trans and LGBT folks are doing something that is going to take away their privilege. And what's sad is that black people feel like they're going to get some of that white privilege with these white people. And it's not going to happen. This is a war, a cultural war, but it's not. A war requires combatants. And I don't think anybody's battling.
No, we're not. The only thing we're fighting for is the right to be us, the right to exist. Nothing more. We don't want to take over. We don't want more than what you have. We just want the right to exist.
Particularly when we talk about this right to exist regarding trans folk, I think one of the ways that is our big struggle to exist, because most of the time, if you're not a doctor, you can't really deny me medicine because you're not a doctor. So the man on the bus calling me a man is not denying my medication. He's not affecting my day-to-day life in the sense that he's denying me something that is going to affect me. But what he can do is create an environment in which other people around him, by not acknowledging my pronouns, he can create an environment where that man can then create an unsafe place where now he's not only outing me, but then he's also allowing other people to disrespect me as well. And so I feel like when we talk about this culture thing, for trans folk, I feel like the big linchpin issue is pronouns. And people are so confused and they're so offended that they have to think about it. And ultimately, it's respecting someone and treating them the way you would want to be treated. You don't want me to look at you and call you a man if you dressed as a woman, and I would not expect you to do the same, but that requires a conversation.
Well, society speaking.
Yes.
Lioness, Simaya, if I can. Why do I have to use pronouns? It makes me uncomfortable. I don't even understand this whole new thing about pronouns. I mean, why do we have to use it? I mean, they and them. That doesn't even make sense to me.
So let me give an example. We always use they and them. This is not new. No one rewrote the human language or the English language. We are using this language in the way that it applies. So let me give you an example. If I told you that there was an administrator or a doctor or a lawyer, and I used a non-gendered term to refer to someone, and I said, there's a lawyer in the suite next to us. There's a lawyer in the suite next to us. And that lawyer next door is over there. And then somebody else in the room has said, hey, I'm looking for the lawyer. What would you say? I didn't tell you the gender of the lawyer. How would you identify that lawyer?
They're in the suite next to us.
They are in the suite next to us. They. That I didn't have to teach you that.
Right.
That's not nothing I had to break down and go through no class on. Your brain naturally said, I don't know the gender of the person in next door that's a lawyer. The person that told me that the lawyer next door didn't say that the lawyer was a male or a female. I assumed that there was no gender, so I said they.
Wow. But what's this? society speaking, but still, I don't understand why that's necessary. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me still.
It made sense just then, and I feel like we cherry pick when we want the rules of grammar to apply. We also cherry pick when we want to give other people grace. So, for example, we don't have a problem when our mothers or our aunties get married 2 and 3 and 4 times, switching that name up every time and adjusting to the new identity. We don't have a problem.
Wow.
We can very clearly remember when our mother changed from Johnson to Jenkins to however many people she married or friends or cousins or however. We've accepted in our society that people's status can change because we allow it to change. We even have in our society allow people to change their name. If Puff Daddy can be Diddy and P Diddy and all these other names and legally get these names changed, then why are y'all so pressed that these people are changing this name for this other personal reason that matters to them?
Wow.
Why are you so pressed to not acknowledge someone else's identity? Because ultimately, I feel like if the goal in our life is to do the social contract, which says that we're going to live and let live, that we're going to do unto others as we're going to have to do unto them, and that we're going to show up in the world, and I just want to live. We say we're a democracy. We say we care about human rights, but ultimately we only care about the rights of ourselves to be comfortable. We care about the rights of white people to be comfortable in this country that we live in. But particularly most people, we only really are thinking about ourselves. But if we really, really, really were being the humans that we say we are, and this was a true contract, in order for me to respect you, you have to respect me too.
And it's not hard.
Period.
Respect is super easy.
Period.
And here's the thing, and I say this all the time. In society, period, I don't have to agree with your religious affiliation.
Right.
I don't have to agree with your belief systems. I don't have to agree with what you eat, what you wear. But I do have to respect the fact that you have the right to do all of those things that do not affect me in any personal way. That's respect. And that's all you have to do.
Period.
It's not that hard.
And what I say to the people that are in public situations and they say, "Well, I don't think that's a woman. I don't think that's a man." Well, you never really knew who was a woman or who was a man. You're just making an assumption, and you're choosing in that moment to let your own bigotry affect how you treat someone. Because truthfully, you never knew anybody's gender. You only were assuming, and you could have been right and you could have been wrong, and sometimes you may have been right or wrong, but the truth is that you were always guessing. So then when you see someone and they tell you, "This is who I am," you don't get to be able to tell them, I refuse to acknowledge you. Because then if you were to come to me and I would have just purposely misgender a woman and call her a man to her face over and over and over and over again, society would be like, "Why are you tearing down this black woman? Why are you tearing her down?" Well, the reality of it is, if I am a woman myself, then you need to acknowledge me as well as a woman, because that respect is earned.
Prime example, and because she was the target a lot of times,
right?
Wendy Williams.
Yes, I knew you were going there.
So often was called that, and we in the community were participants in that. Probably the main culprits in that a lot of times. But let's turn the tables a little bit, and if some person that you didn't know on the street would call you as a gay man, a punk, a girl, the F word, then you would be offended, because that is not who you are.
Exactly. And
misgendering, whether it's in play,
there we go.
Whether it's in play or fun, is not fun to the person receiving it.
That's it. So I think the key thing to remember here is you don't have to, in this conversation, for anyone listening, I'm not asking you to change your mind on how you feel about nothing. I'm not asking you to change your religion. I'm not forcing you to let trans people do this in your life and this in your life. You can draw all the lines in the sand you want, but when you operate in public, you have agreed to a social contract that says, I'm going to do whatever I can to respect the dignity of those around me, and I want them to respect my dignity in return. That's what you're doing when you show up in the world and you open the door for people, and we have social norms. But what the problem is when you see somebody that you can't radically identify, that you can't specifically assess their strengths and weaknesses, you immediately get nervous, and the first thing you want to do is reject. And I just want to let the people know under the sound of my voice, transness, LGBT folk, we don't want anything but to live free and unencumbered so that we can navigate and live our lives without people putting their stuff onto us. All we want to do is live. And particularly for those of you who are in Texas that are have children and you're hearing this, well, is it dangerous? Is it dangerous for my child to be around drag queens? I mean, I never thought about it, but is it? No, because we exist, whether we're on the stage or off the stage, we're existing in your regular everyday life. So you can't hide your child from the world. And just like George said earlier, the sexuality, the things that you experienced as a child on TV, the things that you saw, it didn't make you straight. You became straight because that's who you are. Because I saw those same things and it did not make me less of a trans woman. I only saw men and women in cis hetero normative relationships, and yet I rise. I'm still here.
Right.
So what I'm trying to tell parents that are listening in these states, do not fall for the trap. This whole thing was about unpacking fear by using definitions and terminologies to clarify the things that we know are being said in disinformation. Do not fall for the trap.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, this pretty much wraps up this masterclass, the beginnings of the LGBTQ spectrum. There is so much more to understand, but this is the great opportunity for you to have some information that you can be, that you can have to have a greater conversation with the people in your own community, LGBTQ, and those outside, people who want to be allies and are still trying to understand. So thank you so very much for Lioness for facilitating this. And just in case you didn't know, I'm going to brag on you just a little bit. She is that girl. So, and she does this for a living. And I think it's important as a society, as you so well said, and I always say, it's respectability. It's about understanding that you don't have to agree. You don't have to like, you don't have to follow, but it's just about understanding that life is about respecting the rights of other people. Period, point blank. It's not a long story. It's not a great conversation. It's not that deep.
I agree. Thank you for everyone that listened to this conversation today. Thank you for bringing your thinking caps. Thank you for, if you have any questions, we would love to have it. This is Pride Month. We can definitely answer questions. But more importantly, I would like for those of you who are interested in booking me, my Instagram is at ATL Lioness, and you can get me on Facebook at The Lioness. Also, if you'd like to email me, it's Simaya Turner at yahoo.com. Again, that's SIMAYA Turner, TURNER at yahoo.com. Thank y'all so much. And I do cultural competency trainings, bookings, sensitivity trainings all around the country for police precincts, educational facilities, hospitals. So if y'all are interested, you know where to book me. This is what I do. I'm the Lioness Simaya Turner on the ones and twos, giving y'all the blues.
Yes, indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, we got to get on up and get on out of here. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Continue it. And ladies and gentlemen, share, comment. Okay? Got it? Good. We got to get on up and get on out of here. Please continue to enjoy your day. And as I always say, respect one another. It costs you absolutely nothing. Be safe out there. We got to go. We love you. Bye.
Download the WERUradio app.
Turn it up loud.
Use the shout out feature to talk directly to your favorite station. It's available on your app store. Search WERUradio, one word, today.